What would you do if in a blink of an eye, everybody you ever loved disappeared? Meet Tsutomu Yamaguchi, a Japanese man who experienced unimaginable agony and lived to tell the tale. Yamaguchi was born in Nagasaki, Japan on March 16, 1916. Wanting to make a career for himself, he searched for a job. That's when he found Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, one of the largest firms in Japan at the time. Yamaguchi wanted to work on oil tankers, as it was a very stable and well-regarded job. He joined Mitsubishi Heavy Industries in the 1930s and worked as a draftsman. He did most of his work in Nagasaki, where he was born. However, in 1945, his company sent him on a business trip. He was sent to design a new oil tanker in Hiroshima, Japan. After 3 months of hard work and labor, I'm sure Yamaguchi was more than ready to go back home and see his family. On his last day, he woke up early with 2 of his other colleagues, both who also lived in Nagasaki as well. As they traveled to the train station, Yamaguchi realized something. He forgot his hanko. A hanko is a personal stamp used in Japan. Think of it like a signature. So Yamaguchi made a big 180 and headed back to his office to retrieve his stamp. As he walks towards his office, off by the Hiroshima docks, he heard a buzz in the air. He looked up and claimed to have seen something in the sky. The more he looked, he made it out to be a plane. Then that plane dropped something, which looked to be attached to a parachute. Then it happened. Yamaguchi described it to be a great white flash in the sky. The light was so bright it caused him to dive into a nearby ditch. Then boom. A massive shockwave hit. So powerful that it literally picked up Yamaguchi's entire body, threw him outside of the ditch and onto a nearby potato field. He was knocked out by the impact. After a while passed, Yamaguchi opened his eyes. He couldn't see anything. Everything was black. He later describes it to look like the start of a film at the cinema before the movie starts, when the blank frames just flashed without any sound. Well, Tsutomu Yamaguchi couldn't hear anything because the blast had ruptured his eardrums. Over time, he was able to correct his vision. All over his face and forearms were covered in severe and nasty burns. Ash fell from the sky, and in front of him stood a massive mushroom-shaped cloud that grew in the distance. Yamaguchi had no clue what had just occurred. But just 1.9 miles away was the impact from the first nuclear bomb the world had ever seen. Because of World War II, Japan had built a lot of these air raid shelters in a lot of its cities in the case of bombing attacks. So, despite his agonizing and painful condition, Yamaguchi picked himself up and headed to a nearby air raid shelter. After resting for a bit, he sought after his colleagues. He went looking through the wreckage of what was left of the shipyard. After a long search, he was reunited with his colleagues, who were surprisingly still alive. The 3 men made their way to another air raid shelter. After talking with the other survivors, the 3 men find out there's a train station that is still operating. That's when they made their plan. Get to the train station, get to Nagasaki, and get home. The next morning begins. As they set off on foot, they find the entire city absolutely destroyed. The buildings were almost disappeared, and there were dead bodies everywhere. As they continued their commute, they find even the bridges were completely destroyed. These 3 men had to swim across a river filled with blackened, burnt bodies of men, children, and women. This proved to be a horrific memory for Yamaguchi. After another long walk, they finally arrived at the station, which was actually somehow still operating. These 3 men, along with a large group of survivors, all who had severe burns just like Yamaguchi, made their way to Nagasaki, Japan. The first thing Yamaguchi did was go see a doctor, one who he had known for a very long time. The burns were so bad that not even his doctor could recognize him. After being covered in bandages, Yamaguchi went to go see his family, who also couldn't even recognize him. But at least he was home. His family was safe, and he could finally rest. Well, Yamaguchi, barely even able to move, decided, yeah, I'll go to work. His wife even begged him to stay home. but he believed it was his duty to inform everybody at his job what he had witnessed. So Yamaguchi headed to his office. When his boss had seen him covered in bandages, he was confused as to what had happened. Everybody had heard that there was an attack on Hiroshima, but just like his family and everyone else, they believed it was just another attack. Nobody could have imagined the nuclear destruction that had ensued. They both made their way to his boss's headquarters so Yamaguchi could explain the news. There, Yamaguchi told him what he saw from the sky. His boss thought he had gone crazy, a madman. I mean, think about it. Would you have believed that just one bomb could destroy an entire city? Especially at a time where nuclear destruction was unheard of. Yamaguchi argued with his boss, insisting on what he saw. And just at that moment, another bright white light filled the room. Yamaguchi threw his body to the ground for cover, for he knew what to expect this time. Boom! The shockwave blasted all the windows. His bandages went flying off. But luckily, due to the position of the building, his injuries weren't as severe as his previous encounter. However, unluckily, we're not in Hiroshima anymore. This is Nagasaki. His family lives here. As I'm sure he had thoughts of the horrors he had just encountered, Yamaguchi rushed for his family. Yamaguchi arrived, only to find rubble. He assumed the worst, but continued to search. Eventually, he finds a tunnel where both his wife and child were taking shelter. She was actually planning on buying Yamaguchi ointment for his burns. And if they had not been in that exact spot, she and her child probably would have perished. Tsutomu Yamaguchi and his family spent the next week in an air raid shelter. Though his family was fine, Yamaguchi suffered an extreme case of radiation sickness. His hair began to fall out. His wounds began to rot and were grossly infected, and he was vomiting constantly. He remembers hardly drinking or eating anything. He believed his time would soon be up, and despite all odds, he survived. Yamaguchi kept everything he experienced those few days to himself. He didn't speak up on what he faced until 2005 when his son passed from cancer. Now in his late 80s, he published a book of his memoirs and appeared in the documentary called Twice Bombed, Twice Survived. In 1957, the government of Japan recognized the survivors of these atomic blasts as hibakusha. The hibakusha were entitled to free medical care for the rest of their lives. In 2009, the Japanese government recognized Tsutomu Yamaguchi as the only double hibakusha. And in 2010, Tsutomu Yamaguchi sadly passes away after a battle with stomach cancer. I think we can all learn from Tsutomu resilience and adversity. Despite surviving 2 atomic bombs, Yamaguchi not only overcame extreme physical and emotional trauma, but dedicated his life to advocating for peace. Yamaguchi's life is a reminder of the devastating impact of nuclear warfare, and his legacy will carry on. Come on. If you made it to the end of this video, I just want to say thank you, because beforehand, I can already tell you it's going to take a crap ton of time to edit. Please consider liking the video and subscribing to see more content. I will see y'all in the next one.